Throughout the Second World War, there were many women who worked inside of concentration camps. Some of these became known for their evil and brutality, as they took part in execution and slaughter on a daily basis. Many female guards became known as beasts for their actions towards prisoners, which included beatings, sometimes so serious that an inmate or prisoner's whole life was changed, and many died at the hands of these evil women. But inside of different concentration camps, SS women were being involved in selections in which inmates who were deemed not fit enough to conduct work were sent to their deaths inside the gas chambers. When the Allies liberated camps such as Bergen-Belsen, they came across thousands of people who were sick and dying, and who had been treated badly, but they also came across many victims of the horror. One woman who at the end of the Second World War was executed for her work inside an all-female concentration camp was Greta Bösel, who would brazenly admit to being involved in some of the destructive actions. She was a woman who at the age of 38 would meet Albert Pierrepoint, the British executioner who would execute her and dozens more Nazi war criminals. Join us today as we look at the execution of the perverse female guard of Ravensbrück, and as always, to support our channel, please make sure to subscribe. Greta Bösel was born on the 9th of May 1908 in Elberfeld, and it's believed that she had a rather normal upbringing, but her life would become dominated by the politics of the Nazis and Hitler. Many women who would support the Nazis early on were drawn to the power and sway that Hitler had, and because of this they joined many youth groups and organisations for the Nazis. Later many women would be forced to join these, but those like Greta Bösel would have probably missed out on these for being too old, but she would find employment inside of various different jobs. But Hitler would target these women to have as many children for his empire and Reich as possible, so they could grow up to have boys who would become soldiers, and girls who would continue to have more children. Greta Bösel was a registered nurse, and it's believed she had some form of training in an official capacity. However, she would work at the Continental Company in Hanover, which employed many workers including those prisoners of war from eastern countries that had been invaded by the Germans. But as the Second World War would turn against the German army, many SS men who had worked as guards inside of the concentration camps were needed on the front line, especially following D-Day and the defeat at the Battle of Stalingrad. To plug the gap in the concentration camp workforce, many men and women were recruited and in some cases even conscripted into working in the concentration camps. But Greta Bösel for some reason was sent to the concentration camps by her employer. They may have had a deal with the SS and the Nazis to provide men and women to go and work inside of the camps, but Bösel in 1944 would find herself being sent to Ravensbruck Concentration Camp. Ravensbrück was an all-female concentration camp, which was found relatively close to Berlin. During its time in operation, it's believed that 132,000 women passed through the barbed wire fences, and they came from many different countries, including America and some few from the UK. The majority of women were sent from Poland, the Soviet Union and Germany and Austria, and between 30,000 to 90,000 women were killed in the camp. The prisoners of Ravensbrück had to work incredibly hard, and many died from overwork, disease, starvation and despair. 2,200 were killed inside of the gas chamber, and there were a number of women who were executed. For example, 4 members of Special Operations Executive, the British spy network, were executed there. The guards of Ravensbrück were notoriously evil, and women such as Irma Grazer and Elizabeth Falkenrath had served there, and they were trained here under women such as Maria Mandel, who was known for their brutality. The women guards would patrol with their dogs and would whip prisoners who were not working hard enough. Most of the SS women would meet their prisoner work gangs at the gate each morning, would then take them back later in the day, and if someone was not working hard enough, they would not hesitate but to execute and shoot them. One prisoner said of the conditions of Ravensbrück that they didn't always shoot the women. We were to die of misery, hunger and exhaustion. When we arrived at Ravensbrück it was the worst. The first thing I saw was a cart with all the dead piled on it, their arms and legs hanging out, and mouths and eyes wide open. They reduced us to nothing. We didn't even feel like we had the value of cattle. You worked and you died. It was a terrible concentration camp, but whilst at Ravensbrück, Greta Bösel would train to become a supervisor. At some point she would become the work input overseer, so it was her job to gather groups of women together to form work detachments, so that the camp could be as profitable as possible, and make many materials for the war effort and in various different factories. She would at some point, around December 1944, contract typhus, which was rife across the women's camp, and she did get ill for a significant amount of time and was treated in the camp's infirmary. She was off duty for months and returned back to her work in March 1945, but when she got back she noticed her work was not being the most productive. Because of this, Bösel addressed the 14,000 prisoners at the camp, and then reformed work detachments putting different women together. She would oversee different detachments, and she pushed the women far and also beat them, and was once overheard saying, "Let the prisoners perish if they aren't able to work," meaning she was happy for them to be executed or sent to the gas chambers at Ravensbrück if they did not work themselves well. It's worth noting that at this point in the war, dozens of executions were occurring inside of Ravensbrück each day, but she would also select prisoners herself to go to the gas chambers. When at roll call each day, she would patrol the yards, and if a prisoner was deemed not healthy enough to work, they would be sent to the gas chamber. She was playing God with the lives of people on a daily basis, deciding who would live and who would die. But when the time came to evacuate the prisoners of Ravensbrück, with the Red Army on the horizon, Greta Bösel with her husband decided to try and flee and escape any form of justice. Many SS guards would manage this, and still today there are Nazi hunters who are seeking concentration camp workers to be brought to courts. But Greta Bösel would later be caught, and she was arrested by the British forces. She was interrogated and was then held in a cell for a number of months until the Hamburg-Ravensbrück trials took place, and Greta Bösel was brought to trial and was accused of war crimes and crimes against humanity. She was on trial alongside a number of other men and women who worked at the all-female concentration camp, and the court would hear of her brutality and evil. They heard how she would drive inmates to work hard and would beat them, and they also would hear about how she took part in the selections. She was found guilty of the crimes and for this was sentenced to death. She admitted to the court that she took part in the selections at the youth camp, but there was conflicting statements made by her regarding the timing of her illness and the transports of people from the youth camps to the gas chambers. Because of this, her lawyer would ask for clemency, and he said, "The condemned Bösel reflected towards the end of the war and was conscripted and took her will to Ravensbrück, where the selections took place for a period of 3 months. She had no contact with the events of the years before and was just a little supervisor with limited scope of duties." But the clemency appeal was rejected and she was sent to Hamelin Prison, where she was to await a death sentence. She met with British executioner Albert Pierrepoint the day before her execution was performed, as Greta Bösel's height and weight was taken, so the executioner could work out the drop needed to snap her neck. On the 3rd of May 1947, Greta Bösel walked into the execution chamber at Hamelin Prison, accompanied by Pierrepoint, his assistant, and other members of the British military, and she was led up the stairs of the gallows. Pierrepoint then had secured her arms and legs together, so she could not move easily, and he then placed a black cap over her head and then the noose. Within seconds she was shuffled over the trapdoor, which was then released, and instantly Greta Bösel was executed. She was executed 24 minutes after another defendant, Elizabeth Marshall. Greta Bösel was executed on the gallows of Hamelin Prison for her involvements inside of Ravensbruck Concentration Camp. Despite not being at the camp the whole of the war, in the short time that she was there, she rose throughout the ranks and became known for being a brutal and barbaric overseer. She took part in the selections, in which people were sent to their deaths in the gas chambers, but it would be Albert Pierrepoint who would administer the justice of the courtroom. She was just one of a number of female concentration camp guards who would be executed as the Second World War had came to an end. Thanks for watching. To support our channel, please make sure to subscribe, and once again, thank you so much for watching.